Well, I didn't want to film all the fun we had this morning, but I backed the truck and trailer all the way down in. The breakaway pulled itself out, which acted as a emergency brake. I don't recommend it, but should be good now. There we go. So we got the truck down in, no steering, bagged it right in. We're gonna fix this at some point as well. We're gonna do a nice winch plate. I'm gonna order that for him, and we'll get this thing out of the way. But yeah, so straight in. We were able to use a bar to like turn the steering and whatnot. All that with two-wheel drive. No issues. Now, unfortunately, with two-wheel drive, that means that you only get one shot. Damn breakaway cable pulled. So I started spinning because the breakaway cable came out. I need to come back a little bit more. Well, got a drop. Didn't even have to use the landing gear really. Just hit the bags. So we'll get this thing shut off and head in there. Check this out. Look at that. Ready? Knob. Look at that. Easy. All right, so we got the truck in. Now we get to do our assessment. I need to see what all parts we have. I'm gonna set like all the big shit aside. We got the fender flares, obviously, a fuel bowl for the Commonrail, which we don't need this. Got the valve cover head. All of this stuff just sitting, so I'm gonna set everything aside that he could resell. Alternator, obviously can't use that, but that thing is frozen solid anyway. We have a motor mount for a 12 valve, it looks like. Yeah, stuff like this. So we need to go through here, figure out what we can throw away, what we can salvage. I forget or not if this is for the 12 valve, so I'm gonna keep a hold of everything, just do a parts assessment. If you guys are new to this series, this is what we're gonna be doing. Now, this is just an assessment. We got the intercooler, the drive shaft, all the other stuff in here. The transmission, T-case, all that is ratchet strapped in. It's exactly how it was brought to me. I got to tow it. NV 5600 trans, but for some reason it has a, this is for a G56, which is weird. I didn't know that you could swap them. But it's an NV 5600. It's an 03, or I think it was an 03. And here's how the engine condition. So I got to get all of this pulled back out. The motor mounts are not correct. I need to get the whole wire harness off. I need to get the exhaust manifold and turbo off. Pull the intake off. Just everything needs to get cleaned out. We'll be able to reuse the grid heater with the factory stuff because the 12 valve stuff's down there. So we'll just have to pull all this stuff out and go from there. But basically just need to do an assessment of it. This will be pretty much me pulling everything apart. I'm not, like, I'll put this in the series, but I'm not going to say, hey, this is the start of where we need to do. This is my assessment. And then probably tomorrow we'll come in with, this is what needs done. So I also have a checklist for how to do this swap and how to do it correctly, because when I did my swap, it was not very correct. We slapped my engine setup in about a weekend. And I spent the next year and a half, well, ever since I put it in, spent about 2 years getting that swap correct. So now we know how to do it right, and that's how we're gonna do it from the get-go. All right, here's where we are at. Got everything pushed. I'm gonna have to take some of that stuff, move it back. Got everything cleaned and pushed back. This is where our do not need pile is. So I'm gonna document this because hopefully this isn't damaged, but you guys can see here just how it was sitting. Let me turn a light on for you. This is how it was sitting. So hopefully it didn't break the intercooler itself, but it was literally just resting on, that's its only resting point. So I'm really hoping he doesn't need an intercooler because these things are very rare for a factory intercooler. All right, here's where we are at. I got all the bolts picked up off of the floor. So we're gonna go in here and vacuum because I don't wanna work on dirty stuff. So we'll get it all vacuumed up so we know everything's clean. That way we don't drop things in the transmission as well. And go through, look at all that. Everything, most of the stuff is back in here that we're not gonna use. Anything from like here, anything in the bed. So all of this stuff, most of this stuff is reused. I don't think I'm not gonna reuse this, but I would like to keep the fittings and whatnot just in case. So, and then I got all the bolts popped in there. All right, here is, so the drive shaft probably needs U-joints. I'll let him know before we do any of that. The front one's fine. This one has plenty of wiggle, but these are you know, pretty, not crunchy yet, but they're pretty tight, so I would replace them since they're already out. All right, so here's where we are at. I am working, I got the bumper off and I got the cross support off. So now what we're gonna do, loosen the motor mounts, which it looks like they may already be loose, and we're gonna pull this motor out. That's gonna be the next step. Pull the motor out and then start separating harnesses and whatnot, because I'll be able to separate everything off of the truck. And then we'll figure out with the trans if it looks like it's held up pretty good with the ratchet strap. So I want to get motor and trans, everything sitting on the ground today, and then we'll assess everything. Definitely going to need an AC compressor, going to need a tensioner, going to need an alternator, going to need a water pump, going to need, well, the crank pulley will be fine, but we'll cross this bridge here when we get there. But I need to pull the whole case off. I want to, not the case, but like the case cover. So I want to see if the killer dowel pin has been done, do all the gaskets. We got to pull the P pump off and do the tappet cover gasket. We want to do the oil pan gasket while we're here, but it's all going to get degreased, cleaned up. I'm going to pull the turbo, which I'll do. I am curious. Turbo seems like it is all right. Oh, no. No, that might need a turbo. Yo, I'm gonna try to see if I can't show you this. Let me try to get in here. Here, you guys. Look at that shaft play. Look at that. This thing may need a turbo. No, not may. There's no in and out, but there's a lot of up and down. So, a turbo is definitely going to be something that I'm going to talk to him about. Here's what we found out. Those are factory Commonrail mounts. All right, so some of these engines have, you can see there's a hole here and then there's a hole here. So I don't know. Okay, I can see what he did. So these mounts need to go back, right? You can see that there's a hole here. So on the factory engine, the motor mount sits up here. So that's why you need that steel plate. What this guy did was he took the 2 bolts and he just put them in the first 2 holes. So there's no holes for this to bolt to in the back. That's why you put the steel plate. So it looks like he did move the engine back where it's supposed to be. I was wondering how he did that, but obviously that won't be a structurally sound way to do this. So I'm taking the motor mounts off right here now, so that way I can, actually, you know what, it might even just be easier for me to just pull the motor mounts off here. So I'm gonna try that as well. And then I'm gonna pull the motor mounts off and then we'll just pull this motor out real quick and then we'll go from there. But you guys get the point. These mounts would sit further up, so this motor would never be able to go in here. Alright, this one was kind of seized, so I had to get in there with the 18mm bolts, but I got top bolt off and then the bottom bolt. Let's see if you guys can see in there. Right there. So we got it off. I'm going to time lapse this because I think the motor is going to jump as soon as I get that bolt out. Well, we got her out, and I'm going to show you guys what we found inside the transmission. Look at that. Yeah, this is all bad. We're going to need pretty much all of that. Rat's nest in there. Going to have to clean all that out. Cool. Definitely I'm going to advise him to get a clutch because this one is pretty rusted. This engine has been sitting for a while. He's gonna need a new turbo, new clutch. I'm gonna have to pull all the wiring off, so I'm gonna let him know what is going on. Everything that we don't need pulled off. You can see here is the water temperature sensor. This is where they put them on the 12 valves with the Commonrail harness, what we're going to do is we're going to end up actually putting it up here. So we're going to get rid of this overage pipe right here. We're going to block off this side. We're going to put the sensor in this side here, and then a tiny, tiny little hole in the thermostat as a bypass. I'm talking tiny. So we're going to do all that, and I haven't found the starter yet, so I'm not sure. This thing's also going to need a starter, which I have a starter. Oh yeah, and this thing for some reason likes to leak. Look at that. Definitely need to get a new one at some point. So the good news, the engine does spin. I was able to get it to go. See that? So I got it to go full rotation without any weird noises. That's good. And we'll get all these bolts off of the clutch. The disc itself looks all right. Everything else is rusty. So all of this, we're gonna go ahead. He's gonna buy another one. Hopefully, said O'Reilly's sells a pretty decent clutch. I paid like $350 or $400 for mine, and I'm not stock, and I'm towing a lot, and I haven't had any slip-ups with it. So been super happy with my O'Reilly's clutch. All right, here's what she looks like, all rusty. I got this all back together. I'm gonna get this adapter plate off because I'm gonna need to clean that up too. Rear main is leaking. You can see there's a little bit of oil there, a little bit of residue on it. It's not bad, but you know what? You're already in here, you might as well just do it. So one thing I do need to point out, I don't know if I'm gonna make this point in one of the future videos, but this adapter plate came with this engine and is for this engine. This is for a 12 valve or 24 valve early, and this will fit an NV5600 or any of the manuals. But if you try to use a Commonrail adapter plate on this engine, it will work, but 2 of these holes will not line up, 1 on each side, so you'll only be able to use 6 of the holes. That's what I had to do 2 years ago, and mine's still going strong. So you don't need all 8 of the bolts. If you do decide to go that way, it's not going to hurt anything, but that's the route I had to go. But if you can find a manual transmission motor, that's even better. The reason I say something about this is because my motor was automatic, so I had to reuse my adapter plate. Still, to this day, no issues. And the nice thing was my starter bolted right up, gave me no issues. I was able to use my factory Commonrail clutch with my 12 valve, bolted right up and everything, and the factory starter worked and everything. So I didn't have to do any of that. It was great. We'll have to replace this gasket. You guys can see that. So definitely a little bit of seepage. This oil pan is gonna need replaced. There's a big dent in the bottom of it. There's a massive dent over here. So he already knows, I let him know. But here's what I'm talking about these motor mount plates. You guys can see, here's where the factory motor mount sits. Well, on a Commonrail, this is your front hole, and then there's a back hole back here. So what you have to do is you make a plate, use these 2 bolts for the plate, use these 2 bolts for the plate and the motor mount, and then back here you use the plate for the motor mount and the plate itself. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then these holes will just hold the front of the plate in, and then there won't be any holes in the motor. That's the way that you have to do it, unless you want to do it like this guy did it. He only put the motor mounts in and then bolted them on one side. So that is not the way to do it. That only puts 2 holes in it, and then there's no support on the motor. So I'd be curious to see how it stood up, but I am not willing to take that risk on my own. So there are going to be things that I am not going to show you, and I have decided I will put this on episode 1 because this is where everything needs to get torn down. So the common sense stuff, change your gaskets, obviously pull off any of the wiring that is for this motor. You're going to want to get all of the wiring off of it. We're going to need to get the alternator, all of the pulleys, anything we're not going to use, I need to pull it off. I just got rid of the block heater cable, which I am going to test that. There are things like for the fuel heater and some 12 valve stuff. Any of the wiring for the 12 valve needs to go in general. Gone. Get rid of it. Same thing with this up here. Now, you may be able to use this wiring on the alternator itself, but like I said, let me see here. There is oh, that's a ground. Okay, I didn't get that. So that's apparently a ground. And then there's the positive, which I don't really know how some of the wiring is on this thing, but yeah, basically just remove everything. I'll show you guys how to wire in the alternator later on in the future episodes, but I'm going to get the turbo off. I'm going to get this oil drain off because you are not going to use this oil drain with the motor mounts, it is physically impossible to get this to go over here without causing oil starvation issues, because what happens is you have to bend hard 90, and to do that, oil gets actually backed up in here, and then you end up having oil going out the exhaust or out the intake side. So you cannot do it that way. You need to find a way to put a plug in here. Any of your freeze plug styles, you can freeze plug these, and then you need to have a bung. The 24 valves have a bung over here. The 12 valves do not. So you either need to put one in your block or in your pan. I would prefer the pan. That's how I have mine done. Recommended 100%. So obviously, like I said, he's going to need to get a new oil pan, but you can get any real kit. You just need to be able to go from up here, and you could even cut off the 12 valve one if you want. I prefer to use the OEM one for the Commonrail and then just run it straight down into like a rubber grommet down into the oil pan itself. But you need this to be a straight down shot. You can't do this, because if you do, like, this is fine, but you can't run this on like to this angle. Like, it just wouldn't be possible. You'd have to have it like way up here. This is made for if the turbo sits in the middle. Now you can reuse this if you want to do a second gen swap, but if you want this to bolt up to your factory exhaust, that's the whole point of this. Which, that downpipe looks so small. That's like a 3-inch. That is terrible. And this, yeah, this is an HE341 turbo, so it has the smaller exhaust housing here. You can see how it's like a 4 up here and then a 3.5 down here. So this turbo is bad anyway. You guys could, there's a lot of shaft play in that. Even, it's bad enough that even the camera picks it up. So to the guy who went to do this swap before, obviously he had no idea what he was doing. Here's a Commonrail gasket, Commonrail manifold. What happens when you hold a Commonrail gasket up to a 12 valve? Look at that. Let me watch what I move this a little bit. Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that. The manifold is not even making contact. Look at that one right there. Like, he's using the Commonrail gaskets, which is a big no-no. Okay? I tried that shit. Didn't work. So here's the thing. What needs to end up happening is we need to go and get the Remflex gaskets that I swear by. We need to go and get those and then run those with the Commonrail manifold, because those will not leak like a standard gasket will. Look how big the holes are. So the thing is, I actually port matched my manifold for the 12 valve, okay? But yeah, don't do that. I'm also going to be getting rid of these here. These are going to go in exchange for actual hoses, and those go to the heater core right here. So probably going to end up getting rid of the insulation because it's shot, and occasionally it likes to catch fire when it does things like this. So I'm going to end up getting rid of all of that. Still pulling it apart. Turbo's sitting over there. Talk to him about that, see what he wants to do. I need to get this thing off of here, and I need to pull this plug out of here as well. So pull this guy out. There we go. Got that out. Alright, so here is... Jake, what are you doing? What are you doing? Big old grizzly bear standing over there. So, things you don't need. Obviously the drain. You gonna say something? You gonna say something again? So those things you don't need. I'm gonna get a freeze plug for this size. I just need to measure that out so that way we can block that off correctly. Jake, shut up! Jake be yelling and shit. So alternator, probably gonna need a new one of these. Take off your harnesses and whatnot. I am going to go to Home Depot. I'm gonna take this fitting, and this fitting. This needs to be just a 90, not two of them. So I need one of these, I need one of these, and this one I'm going to use for the sensor for the Commonrail. And I need to get rid of any, like I said, I'm getting rid of any of the wiring right now. That is crusty, super crusty. That doesn't spin right. That sounds terrible. So yeah, this one spins terrible. This is the only one I'm going to be questionable on. Maybe we'll allow that one to slip, but every one of these needs an AC compressor, needs an alternator, needs a tensioner, and it definitely needs a water pump. So I also got to get rid of this guy here. Just common sense stuff. I don't need to show you guys, like me getting rid of the harnesses and whatnot. That goes with any swap. So obviously get the old stuff off. You're just going to have to use your best judgment on that. If you do feel like it is hard to follow along, or to say, hey, I don't know what to remove, this swap is most likely not for you. Please don't attempt it. There are a lot of ways that you can screw this up. And the other thing about it is there is a lot of pros to this, okay? Obviously, you get your cheap, simplicity, easy to work on. This is a super reliable swap when you do it right from the get-go. I work on mine because it makes content. That's just what I like to do, and I didn't do it right the first time. I literally just slapped it in, like I said before. Jerry-rigged a lot of stuff. Now that everything is perfect and right, now I need to replace the engine. So that's pretty much why mine wasn't all that hard. The guy that bought this, he bought this truck before finding my videos on how to do the 12-valve swap, and then he reached out. He didn't look at my videos and say, hey, I want to do a 12-valve swap because of your videos. He's doing it because he wanted to do it before finding my videos, and I am apparently the only one on YouTube that will actually answer and talk to you about how to do this swap. And as I do more of them, we're going to do them even more right than the last one every single time. I want a truck that is a turnkey for this guy, that he can just drive it and not have to worry about anything but oil changes and general maintenance. That's how I see it, and that's how I want it to be for the guy. That's pretty much why you would want to do this swap. It is very reliable. It is a super reliable setup with the NV5600. You just need to make sure that you set yourself up correctly from the get-go. Not slap it in, let it make you money, then start fixing everything. It is such a headache to do it that way, and I found that out. All right, so as for the fuel shutoff, here is a factory fuel shutoff solenoid, okay? This is this guy right here. It uses 3 wires, a power, a ground, and a signal. I believe that's how they do it. So what happens is it'll pop power to it so that it can come up. You start the engine, and then it will put constant power to it. What happens is these things fail, which this is the fuel shutoff on a 12-valve, and this is what I have replaced on mine with a pull lever, because these are very unreliable. It is what it is. That's just how they are. So I have a mechanical one. This one is a factory one. Unless you buy the harness to set it up in a 3rd gen, you use a mechanical one. Yes, it's nice to be able to turn the truck on and off with the key, but in my case, I like being able to take the key out of the ignition and go into a store and then come back and turn it back on. I like that. So if you're sitting there asking yourself, what wiring do I need to remove from the 12-valve that isn't attached to the Commonrail truck? Get rid of everything. Pull it all off, every one of the sensors. Pull this sensor out, find a plug. It just looks disgusting. You can go put an aftermarket sensor in there if you want, but anything, I think, to do this swap correctly, you need to get rid of the factory sensors. This sensor here, replace it with a plug. This sensor, replace it with a plug. Things like that. Then you can go ahead and replace stuff with the Commonrail stuff. This temperature sensor, like I said, is going to get moved up in here. I took that line off as well. I'm going to use this factory location, put that there, simple as that. Bada bing, bada boom. Now we're going to remove any one of the pulleys, and everything needs to get removed that you aren't going to use. And the reason I say that, like you can see this guy plugged off that. You're just going to end up replacing that nub in here with a plug. So pull the alternator off, and I'm going to try to get that thing out so that I can go and buy the fitting that I need to block all this stuff off. So it looks pretty sketchy. I got it on a board and a jack stand in the front, obviously not letting it go off of there, but I just wanted it to stay up in the air for me. So I need to get the intake horn off. Wow, a grid heater that is... I'm actually kind of jealous. Yeah, you also need to vacuum all that shit out there. I don't know how he got stuff in there, but generally the grid heater and this is all one solid piece. So I need to pull all of this off. Like the whole thing's going to need vacuumed out. I'm going to have to pull all of the lines off. The P pump needs to come off so I can get back here. The fuel bowl, all of that stuff. All of this stuff needs to come off, because even though we are going to reuse it, we need to pull it off so that we can clean it, replace gaskets, and just make sure that you're doing it correctly. Because if you rig stuff on the internet, people will say something about it, and they'll get offended by it. So make sure you do things correctly, which for the sake of other people to be able to do this correctly, I would like people to be able to do turnkey 12-valve swaps, which is why I'm going to be doing this series. And I do hope that this series does well, because it took me a long time to be able to find another one to do that. So we got the lines removed. There was fuel in the bowl, and it was very watery. Got all that removed, kept all the bolts where they're supposed to be. You come in here and you can see all of that. So I'm gonna get all that cleaned out as well. We're gonna need to pull the gasket service up, run the vacuum, and go from there. All right, so this is how this engine looks before. I'm gonna come in here with a vacuum and clean all that up, and I'll give you an after. All right, we are working on getting, we got this guy off. This one's about shot. Got the alternator off, which is pretty rusty crusty. We'll have to get these bolts out, but I want to soak these because a lot of times these like to snap. And working on, I need to get this guy out. These are not fun. This is the one on mine where I did put a block on it, and it sucks to do. Super concerning that there's like sludge in there. Let's see on this guy right here, but they're pretty cheap. I'm gonna get this whole thing cleaned out, and hopefully it's a good motor. There is some red in there. So next step will be to get this guy off. I gotta take these bolts out, take these bolts out, then we can take the front cover off, get this guy off here. This thing just spins off. Looks like somebody damaged that. That's the position you want it in, straight up. There definitely sounds like there's some noise in there, so that might need replaced. All right, so always take care of the KDP. We got everything out. One weird bolt, I don't know why. I guess that's how it was in there. And then there's two for the crank sensor. One's long, one's short. So obviously you can only put them in one way. This one goes here, and then there's another one that's short. So let's pull this thing off and see how far out the KDP was. Wow, actually looks fairly clean. I'm surprised. There's the oil pump. KDP was smacked in at one point, but not tabbed. So even though it looks like somebody just tapped it in with something, I mean, it shouldn't come out, but we're still gonna tab it just in case. I also needed to pull this off because we're gonna be pulling the entire P-pump off since we have to do the tappet cover. So might as well just do everything at once, and then we can clean this separately. I gotta take the gasket off. Looks like somebody was in here fairly recently, but the front main was still leaking, so we're gonna go get a Cummins gasket. I had a guy before about so some of these gaskets from AutoZone are super thin, and I had a guy before saying something pretty freaking stupid about the front main. Oh, it's, you know, you hit it in or something like that, and it's like, these absolutely need to be thick and beefy, and OEM Cummins is the only way to go with these things. If you get the AutoZone ones that are super thin and flimsy, then they do break. Sometimes they break on the way in. It's just the nature of the beast. So make sure you get the Cummins one. Don't listen to anybody that just tells you to go out and, you know, just get an AutoZone one. They will give you issues. So I'm gonna get this all cleaned up, get everything sprayed out, get all the excess, you know, the sealant out of here, and we'll clean this all up. So here's some of the spare parts. Now I do recommend you guys, when I'm telling you take stuff off, get rid of it, I don't actually mean get rid of it. Make sure you save everything until the swap is complete. The reason I say that is because I have a way that I want to do this. I have a way that I prefer. And the way that I do it is the way that I feel is correct for what I want. Now, you guys may find that you can reuse, say, a piece of a harness for the factory and integrate it into the truck. So if you guys feel that way, feel free to keep everything. I have ways of doing it. If you don't like that I'm putting the sensor here, move it. You can move your sensor back there. You can do any which way you want. This is the way that I prefer to do it, and this is the way I'm going to do it. For video reference, you can try to figure out your own way to do each individual thing if you want. No problem with that. Everybody's going to be different. This is why, you know, it's a modified vehicle. It's not a factory vehicle. There is no right or wrong way to do this as long as it's safe and it passes inspection. Just keep that in mind. I was able to get everything off. One of the bolts did end up snapping, so I'll have to drill and tap that. But besides that one, everything else came off. Killer dowel pin, I'm gonna make my little tab for that. The way that I do it is I take the crank sensor and I break off a little bit of a tab of it. This is the factory crank sensor for the 12 valve, which you will not be reusing. I just break one of these tabs off and I put that where the bolt was at, and I use that as my killer dowel pin. Feel free to do whatever you feel like. This is free. This is the way I'm gonna do it. You're never gonna see it, and there is nothing wrong with doing it that way. That's what I've done on mine, and it works great. All right, so I ended up using one of them like wire things that like holds the wires. I ended up just cutting it, and you can see that'll be perfectly fine. You can literally use anything you want. Like, they sell kits to do this on the interweb, and you don't need to do any of that. This is literally it. All I did, I smacked it in with the hammer, so it's not gonna move. You know, a hammer and a flathead screwdriver got it all nice. So I gotta do. So now I'm gonna go grab this beefy guy, pull this off, and then there are 4 nuts back behind. There is a support, and then there is an oil feed right there. So the P-pump definitely needs to come off at this point. So that's the next thing. So for the guys that need to get the P-pump off, I'm gonna put this section specifically for it. Big nut here, you're gonna have to use a puller. There is 1, 2, 3, 4 nuts for you to grab. You have 1 fitting there. You have the fitting here for your overflow valve. You have 1 really long 10 mil bolt right there, another really long bolt right there, and then on the back there is an 8 mil right underneath here holding this entire line on and in place. And you have to remove it, because if you don't, it'll be in the way. This thing is ready to pull out. Now when you do pull this off, this spring comes with it. This is on a bracket right there, so you will need to do that as well. And then that should be everything, other than, you know, unplugging it and getting your line off of here. You do need to get this line off right here and take this line off. This goes to the wastegate on the factory trucks, and then that should be it. So this is my tool for getting it out. Just kind of like wobble it in from the end. See, a bunch of wobblers. Now, there's the 4 bolts right here. Ignore those, because I made a boo-boo before when I was doing my first P-pump. I had no idea. These bolts don't actually need to come out. So we're at the point now where we're able to break it free, and everything is good and out of the way, minus there is 1 nut still down there. I was able to save this guy here, but this line will follow its way out. And when you put the P-pump in, you need to make sure that this is in the proper spot, otherwise you'll be pulling it once again. Use a pry bar and a little bit of elbow to get that out. P-pump is off. Here's that bracket I was telling you about. You can take that bracket off with a 10 mil right there. I'm not gonna move it. Here's the factory oil pressure sensor. So need to find a way. I need to remove this and reuse the oil pressure sensor from the Commonrail to get the gauge to work. So you guys can see, this is ultimately why you need to pull the P-pump. And I do need to take this bracket off actually, because it's in the way of this. So this is why you need to pull the P-pump, is because you need to do the tappet cover. You can see all the oil and stuff on here. This needs to come off. So this is 100%, this is leaking, and you can see that. There's oil all over the side of the engine. So I'll get with the customer on this, whether we want to rebuild the vacuum pump or not, which is this guy here. This is the power steering pump. So there's gaskets in here that go bad, but I'm pulling this off because at the bare minimal, we want to replace this gasket right here, which is dirt cheap for the customer and not any extra labor for me to do this now. But if he ever decides that he needs to do this gasket while it's on the truck, this is a pain in the ass to do when it's in the truck. So I need to undo the oil line that's right here, goes into the block right there. I need to undo a couple of things. This guy here needs to come off, and then this guy's ready to come back and pretty much get out of the way. So there's 2 bolts right here, 15. Here is the pump for you guys. You can see here, basically there is a gasket between it that obviously I want to clean the surface up and replace this gasket. Even if it's not bad right now, mine ended up leaking at one point and it was obnoxious. So it only takes a little bit. So replace this gasket. We'll also be able to clean all of this up. The oil pan definitely needs replaced, as I've said before. So this all is out of the way and we can clean all this up. I'm gonna get this pulled off probably before I leave today. And then we'll call it a day, get our mess cleaned up, and we will start back on this thing tomorrow. All right, so the way to get this off, there is 6 bolts in here. I don't know if he wants to do a factory one yet or an aftermarket one, but you can see all this stuff this is the cover for, which I have no idea why the factory uses it. I'm sure someone in the comments will be able to tell me, but it's held in with this bolt here and this bolt here. But that doesn't matter because I'm not worried about that right now. What I need to do is get the leaky cover off. So you're just gonna have to find a corner, which I can't do this one-handed, but you're just gonna have to find a corner and start prying at it. Now, I really have no idea why this was the design for the 12 valves and the 24 valves. You can see this whole spot right here was leaking. Pretty much what it looks like behind the tappet cover. You can see here just how bad these are. This is the crankcase ventilation tube right here. A lot of guys will actually delete it and move it up to the top of the valve covers or run both of them. But that's pretty much what I'm gonna accomplish for the day. This gasket is going to come off. You're gonna understand why. This gasket is gonna come off and start breaking and be brittle, which I'm surprised it hasn't yet. A lot of these get really, really brittle. Actually, you can feel it now. I can feel it, but yeah, see, that one's already torn. So, oh, yeah, sorry, I wasn't even filming or paying attention to where I was at. But yeah, so this one, it's brittle and tearing in certain spots. That's just the nature of it. So we'll throw it away, get him a new one, and go from there. But this is pretty much where we are done stopping for the day. I'm gonna get this whole mess cleaned up, and then we're gonna leave. There's the gear for the P pump. And then this one, you don't need to remove anything. It just comes right out, no need to pull the gear. And then if you wanna find top dead center, you come back here and you press on this thing, and you spin the motor until that physically goes inside of this. So I'm gonna do that probably tomorrow. Just make sure you always remember to pop it back out, which it can fight you, like in this case. So make sure you always pop it back out because there's a little nub in there and you'll break it off. So this is where we're gonna end off for the day. You guys can see we got the teardown pretty much complete. I'll talk to him later on if he wants to do head studs or not. Doesn't matter to me, but I'll probably go ahead and go through and retorque every one of the head bolts. If he doesn't, probably do them at like 110, 115 foot-pounds, whatever it allows me to do. I'll have to go to Home Depot eventually. I'm gonna pull this guy here. This is gonna get replaced with a single. There's a sensor up here that's gonna get replaced, and then this is gonna get replaced as well with something. So I'll end up spraying this whole thing down with Spray 9. We'll get it all cleaned up and whatnot. I know when I do my next motor, we're gonna be painting it Cummins beige. So I really like that color. I also need to order something to block this off, but I'd prefer to use probably just a freeze plug. Just gotta figure out what size it is. And then go back here. Possibly, if he wants to, I would love to do a coolant bypass, but if he's not gonna be towing more than one car at a time, or whatever he's gonna be doing. If I was gonna do this again, I would definitely do that, just because put an extra thermostat back here. And these engines run like 10 degrees hotter in the back than they do the front, sometimes even more, sometimes less. It's just, you know, a general average. So definitely need a rear main. Gonna need a front main now since we pulled the front cover off, but that's worth it because I can replace this gasket back here, which I don't know why they don't use a O-ring back here like they do with the P-pump, but is what it is. I don't have any say over that. That's just something they do from the factory. Little bit of wear on the crankshaft here. So when we get that front main in, I don't want that to leak. And then the oil pan gasket, but everything over here is pretty good. Pretty good. So we just need to clean it all up and start throwing it back together. This right here is where we're gonna put our boost. If he decides to get gauges and whatnot, we'll put our boost gauge sensor right here. And then we just need to make sure we get all the sensors and the fittings to go over there. Here's our block heater. We will have to use, if you guys can see here, this will screw into there and then like that. So the 12 valve one is the one that you need to use, but you need to switch the ends, I believe. I'll have to go over that when we do it, but there should be a fitting to be able to convert that. It is entirely unnecessary. This is why some people should just not be allowed to touch vehicles, but whatever. Stuff over here as well. So we'll figure it all out. Like I said, this was episode 1 of getting the teardown, and that's gonna complete it.